a podcast to honor the gods.
This better come with a sacrifice.
Deus Ex Media.
Content and Capable acknowledges the Indigenous people on the land on which we record this podcast, the Turungurung people. We offer our respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Sovereignty was never ceded. Welcome to Content and Capable, where I recently read a book that challenged me to quit my job, and now everything is under question. My name's Sam, I'm your host, and joining me this week is Dara Starr Tucker. Hi, Dara.
Hi there, Sam. Hi there. Good to be here.
It's lovely to connect. If people don't know who you are on the internet, could you give a little bit of a rundown of what you do?
Well, I am a singer and songwriter turned social commentator, I suppose. I do little micro documentaries on TikTok and Instagram, all kinds of platforms, but it started on TikTok. But I do little explainer videos and breakdowns on issues regarding race and culture, and then a lot of the entertainment that I love, film and television and music, and oftentimes how those things relate to race and culture.
As you said, you're a musician turned social commentator. How did you get to? It's a very fascinating position that you seem to be in online. How did you get into putting social commentary out as well as being a musician and still actively putting on shows?
Well, it really happened, like for a lot of people, it happened during the pandemic. Life started to shift and priorities began to change because, as you know, being a musician and a performer, the pandemic kind of shut all of that down. And I had just recently moved from Nashville to New York. So already I didn't have a lot going on with the music. I mean, I was always one to kind of keep writing and whatever, but I was not performing at that time. So kind of mid 2020, and I started to kind of question, like, all right, well, what am I supposed to be doing right now? I had gotten some new video equipment, and I'm like, well, whatever is going on, however long all of this lasts, the shutdown, however long that lasts, I want to be able to be active, and I'm going to have to shift online. I'm going to have to shift my presence online, which I was already comfortable with anyway, because I had done some vlogging in the past and had kind of experimented with some different ways to reach my audience. But I turned to my manager / bass player / husband, and I said, Greg Bryant, and I said, I feel like my audience is out there, and there is a way that I can connect with them, but I really don't know how to reach them. I do not know how to reach my audience. And it was very frustrating, like putting music out there. Sometimes it just isn't the thing that's going to grab people online necessarily. I think we're kind of past the days of people being discovered in their bedrooms and, that kind of thing that went on maybe in the early 2000s. But, I just felt like there were some people that I was supposed to be speaking to, and music kind of became a very limiting way to do that. Cause all the crazy stuff that broke out in 2020, the crazy year that it was like, well, am I supposed to write about this and put it into music and then wait 2 years for an album to be released when I don't even know when the next time I'm going to be able to make an album is? Like, I was bursting at the seams because I had so much to say about everything that was going on in the culture. So yeah, it just came out of that. It was like, it's time to speak out. It's time to open my mouth and just say what is on my mind, and no better time than a shutdown for that to happen. Like, I've got the camera equipment, and I love making, I'd already been making like short documentary films on some musician friends of mine. So yeah, it was just kind of a continuation of that.
Yeah, it was a fascinating time, and it's interesting you made the comment about musicians are no longer being discovered in their bedrooms, because I don't know. I was just thinking to at least some of the artists that I followed fairly recently, and it's fascinating to see where we've shifted from being discovered in your bedroom to being discovered on a social media platform like TikTok, and you're no longer in your bedroom. You know, let's be honest, the little black box that is our mobile phones can, you know, produce cinema level quality videos. So it's now, you know, about the polish, and it's about, you know, how good do you look without any help before, you know, an artist gets, you know, discovered. I'm thinking of like Jake with like, I forget his, wow, my excellence at names has escaped me yet again. But, you know, there's just been some musicians that have broken through, but not all. And it's been very fascinating to see who does and who doesn't. And then the ways that the people who wouldn't, you know, who haven't broken through with whatever music they have, how they've reacted. And obviously you've created such a fascinating collection of really interesting and challenging videos that I've been really enjoying watching.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So when you decided to start making social commentary videos, where like, had you already been making these kinds of observations before putting them in video format?
Well, I've always been somebody with an opinion, that's for sure. And, you know, I talk my husband's ear off, and I talk my friends' ears off, and my family's ears off, and whoever will listen. Well, I always end up, if I go home, and I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and if I go home and get together with my brothers and sisters, and we're always having debates and conversations about something. So, you know, I'm not someone who's ever been afraid to speak my mind, and I've always been told that I'm overly analytical, overly opinionated, and I've just always been that person. But I had never really put, you know, if you're a musician, you're kind of taught to be very careful about the image that you put out in the world. It's like, well, you don't want to alienate, especially in the world of jazz, which is where my music tends to be categorized. It's like, well, you know, a lot of these people are kind of older, they're boomers, some of them are conservative, and you just kind of don't want to be that person who's just, you know, just sounding off about every other thing. And I also just didn't want to kind of add to the cacophony on social media, just like, because it would irritate me when I would just see too much political stuff coming through my feed, or just too much yakety yak about, you know, complaining about, you know, racist stuff. And a lot of it just felt like noise. And so I'm like, I have things to say, I have an opinion, I have a point of view, but I want to do this in a way that feels creative, that feels even artful, that feels like it is enriching the viewer, and not just something that is taking and siphoning away their energy. Because I know what the difference is for me. You know, if I feel like, oh, someone is just dumping the troubles of the world on me, and maybe my stuff comes off that way sometimes, I don't know. But I just feel like there's a difference between somebody saying, hey, here's a bunch of crap you got to worry about, versus like, hey, let's find another way to think about this phenomenon that happens within our culture. And let's think about cultural appreciation versus appropriation. And, you know, how can we sort through these things, and where do we place Elvis Presley in this conversation versus someone like Paul Simon? And, you know, just because I've got that kind of a thinky approach to things, and I want to analyze and, you know, just kind of delve into things a little more deeply and contextualize things historically. That's what's always important to me. Yeah. Let's find out what the history is here. If people are complaining about racism, then let's understand why and how these things have impacted us. And so telling those bigger stories and kind of weaving a narrative, because I am a filmmaker at heart, that's the way that I feel, you know, it's the way that I feel what I do is a little bit differentiated from just some of the complaining and the sounding off on social media, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, like, as someone who I don't play professionally, but I have studied music to get to the point where to play professionally. The importance of like understanding the cultural context in which you perform and in which you write as well, I think is often not really talked about publicly, I want to say. Like, at least when we talk about mainstream popular music. And it's fascinating, especially when you know, in terms of jazz and in terms of interacting, you know, with, you know, early iterations of pop that, you know, comes from jazz and bluegrass, and all the way through to, you know, what we have today, and the way that they interact with, as you said, you know, race and our cultural climate, and, you know, them fitting people into that. Have you always been thinking, you know, about how, you know, as you say, you're very opinionated. You've always had, thoughts about this kind of stuff. But have you always been then voicing it in the same way that you do in your videos?
Well, I was raised in a very conservative Christian environment, and I was raised in, a very multicultural environment. And I was raised with parents who always taught me to be very, and I'm going to use a biblical word here, very circumspect in the way that I presented myself. And we were never taught, I don't know how much you know about kind of racial dynamics in the United States, but we have what, respectability politics are, very much with us still. And it's like, hey, you present yourself in this way and people will treat you in this way. And to a certain degree, that's universally true. But I think in the Black community that, it tends to be a little bit of an albatross that we carry around our necks. It's like, well, we have to be this type of representative for our so-called race. We have to be, positive representation, because people will pretty much judge all Black people by whatever experience they have of you. And so, my parents were not college educated. My father, was kind of in and out of college at different points in his life, but he never got his degree. But they were definitely taught to comport themselves in a very particular way. And they taught us to carry ourselves in a certain way and just to be those quote unquote good Black people. You have to be the good ones, because, this is a constant struggle for us to be perceived in the way that we want to be perceived. So we weren't supposed to be the ones that were out there just sounding off about, cops killing Black people and, the way that someone treated us and followed us around in the store. And we just weren't going to be those people who were making a fuss, making things difficult for anyone. And so, especially as a woman, also that dynamic was there. So no, I never felt comfortable publicly speaking out in the way that I have. And I really had to get to a point mentally where I allowed myself to step back and go, you know what, who is it serving for me to stifle my own voice in this way? There are people who need to hear about what I have to say, and they need to hear it in exactly the way that I want to say it. And I was taught to be very careful with how I use words, and I'm not just, out there with my little hot take on every little thing. But when it comes to, again, like placing things within historical context and really providing some education around the issue of race, like, hey, there are people who don't know this stuff. And there's a whole lot of stuff that I have had to delve into and research that I wasn't taught properly, even as a Black person. I was not taught properly. And so it's like, who am I serving with my silence? Who is my silence serving? I started to ask that question. And then I started to remind myself that it was really my job and my responsibility to maybe piss some people off, and that was just going to have to be okay. I didn't wake up in the morning going, who can I piss off? But if through the course of me doing what I felt, was my responsibility to do and speaking out, if through the course of that somebody ends up being pissed off, then that doesn't mean that what I am doing is that I should back away from that, or what I'm doing doesn't have value, or that there's something wrong, or I need to change course, or I need to alter anything. It doesn't mean that. It just means it's pissing somebody off. And maybe the fact that they're pissed off means that they need to step back and they need to alter their course and they need to rethink things, So I do the best that I can to present things in a balanced way, or in a thoughtful way, I'll say. But aside from me making sure that I take responsibility to be truthful in what I'm saying to the best of my ability, and there are certain things that are subjective, of course, but aside from my responsibility to be truthful and to be, in a basic sense, respectful to people, aside from that, I don't really owe anyone anything. I don't work for a corporation.
No, not at all.
I work for myself. So it's freeing in a way, just to be able to wake up in the morning and say that the words that I write are mine. My opinions are mine. I take responsibility for what I say. If I misstep at all, then I have to, to own up to that and make any slight corrections that I feel I need to. But, that's been minimal. I don't feel like there's been a whole lot of times where I've had to get out there and be like, hey, guys, I didn't see that quite the right way. And I'm so sorry. That doesn't happen a lot, because I really try to be thoughtful about how I speak when I speak. It's a heavy
Yeah, yeah.
responsibility, and I take it seriously.
Yeah, it's very fascinating because I come from Australia. I actually have a really strong familial connection with the First
Okay.
Nations people of Australia. My father grew up on a Catholic Indigenous mission out in the middle of the outback in bits and
Okay.
pieces. Anyway, so I feel incredibly strongly about, and I've tried to keep myself as educated as I can about at least Indigenous affairs here in
Okay.
Australia. And it's always fascinating when I go to the US and I interact with people from the US and talk about, the way that racism looks like in a country that is not the one that I've grown up in, and to see the parallels. And when you mention pissing people off, it just reminded me of we're heading into a referendum at the moment about recognizing Indigenous people in our constitution and creating what we're calling a voice to Parliament. It's an advisory body that speaks directly to the government on matters that matter to Indigenous people, and then for them to give advice directly to the government about that. It's fascinating because the way that we've been discussing it, there has been like almost two sides. You've got that respectability politics side where, people are like, well, we've got to make sure everyone looks good and, is nice to each other and la-di-da. And you have the other side who are people who are consistently fed up with, with the racism, with the assumptions, with the terrible, terrible names and treatment that they've been received, who are like, well, screw this. I'm going to go and take that anger that I have and use it to voice my opinion, and I don't care if I'm going to make people angry, and maybe making people angry might actually push them in the right direction, which I would argue is a very valid point. And it's nice to see an aspect of the fight against racism in the States also taking on that little bit, because I've seen that anger for 15 years, and it's nice to see that there's that anger is, and that I don't want to say indifference, but like that understanding that making people uncomfortable is probably a healthier path to education. In some ways, I don't know. It's been but like from your perspective as well, as you were educating these people and making people feel uncomfortable. What were some of the kind of responses you were getting from people?
Well, they're all over the place. I try to remind myself to not give too much attention to the the haters or whatever. I try to remind myself to not put an undue focus on the folks that just they will always come through and just have something negative to say. And you really encounter that on platforms like Facebook and YouTube, where I've just essentially decided to leave the comments to Jesus, because I can't even go and look at the positive stuff, because it just is besieged by it's just a dumpster fire on those particular platforms. But there's always positive stuff. But my mind just always seems to want to settle on the people that have something to say about it. So on every platform, I deal with it. I deal with that on TikTok. I deal with it on Instagram, depending on what the subject matter is. If I'm focusing on race, there is a 100% chance there's going to be people popping off in the comments who are, either minimizing whatever it is I'm talking about, or telling me that I'm have no business talking about it, or you guys want to play victims and you're just, you're not oppressed and you're not marginalized and all of this crap. So, a lot of them will organize on their Discord servers and their Reddits and their whatever, and they'll come and just, if it's a hot enough topic, they'll come and just descend and try to kind of crash the post with negativity. So I've had to deal with that. I've had to deal with, everything in between. And then there's some topics that are mostly positive. Usually if I cover some aspect of the entertainment business, like I recently did a video on just Lucille Ball and her involvement in the development of the Twilight Zone and of Star Trek. So if I do a video like that, then the comments they're mostly positive. There's not a whole lot of controversy involved in that. So I try to remember to focus on the good and just to take in the love, because there's always going to be a torrent of both. So I try my best to try and focus on the positive.
Yeah, I don't know, like, to me, I'm always, and it's a very white person thing. Always looking at, and part of me wants to ask the question of like, are we getting towards the point where, you know, we're solving racism in some aspect? Like, I don't know. It is the whitest question I could ask, and I feel, but like at some point we want to, you know, have these systems of oppression taken down. Like that's what we want in the end, right? Like, and are we getting to that point?
I am very encouraged when I listen to people of your generation and even younger, you know, really millennials and younger, because you guys seem to be the ones who want to plug in and actually get some work done. My generation, I'm Gen X, and my generation, we were just like John Mayer said, we were waiting on the world to change. We were not like digging our fingers in and doing the hard work to make anything different. And that's probably a part of why I work so hard right now. You know, now that social media is so prominent, now we have so many outlets to do this kind of work. It's one of the reasons that I've kind of exploded out with just like, you know, I've got all this crap that I've been holding on to for most of my adulthood because we weren't really encouraged to speak out when we were younger. So I feel encouraged when I see people probably 35 years and younger, because y'all aren't taking any crap. You're not. You're just out there going, look, this is not okay. This is what's not right. And of course, you have, you know, the other side of things as well. But there's such a huge contingency of younger people right now who are just, they are woke AF, as people say. You guys are just, you're dealing with indigenous issues. You're not afraid to call out systemic racism and white supremacy. You're not afraid to call out anti-LGBTQ, you know, folks, or homophobia, transphobia. You're not afraid to call any of it out. And so I feel like, yeah, you guys are going to move things forward so much more than what the previous generations have. I mean, the boomers did their thing in the 60s, let's not forget. But that was such a small contingency. People don't think about it. Like in the 60s and early 70s, you know, people act like the entire world was just alight with, you know, social change. It's like, no, there was a tiny sliver, probably 5% of the young people in the United States were all about peace, love, and, you know, social change, and were, you know, hanging out and at Haight, you know, Ashbury. The rest of the world was, you know, they were just doing their white bread, vanilla, waspy thing. They weren't thinking about change. They were just watching, you know, they were watching styles change, and they were kind of latching on to some of that. But how many of those people were really about change? And with you all's generation and in the younger generation, like, a lot of you are really dialed in and understand what is needed in order to deal with things like climate change and just all kinds of things. So I'm hopeful and I'm expectant that you all kind of, you know, to give you all the ball. It's like some of these crusty butts need to go and sit down somewhere. You know, we got Mitch McConnell literally like zoning out. I don't know if you saw this from where you are, but he's literally just like somebody said, Mitch McConnell, I don't know, the blue screen of death, like there used to be with Microsoft. He just completely like, you know, these people, Dianne Feinstein would be another one, the senator in California, and even Joe Biden, and they need to step aside and allow the younger. We've never had a Gen X president in the United States. We've never had a Gen X president. And so that's a problem. We just have so many older people who are just not wanting to let go of the reins. And that's what I'm concerned about at this point. But no, I think you guys got it.
Yeah. It's very lovely to hear. But it is fascinating when you mentioned that, you know, you haven't had a Gen X president and bits and pieces. It's a fascinating, I think, side effect of living longer. I've seen a few people discuss this, the fact that we have such a larger age range of people. You know, we've had all these advancements in health. People are consistently living beyond, you know, 80, 90 years old. It means that there are still people who are 80, 90 years old who, you know, represent us in politics and bits and pieces. And then the fascinating, someone broke down the statistics of the last, it must have been the last 30 years worth of presidents. And the way that, you know, it really has stagnated as to like what generation and how old these people are. We've had the last 3 or 4 presidents have been except for Barack Obama, have been basically from the same generation. And it's been a very, very interesting social commentary as to, there's that whole running line of like respect your elders, bits and pieces. But, when your elders are in a wheelchair, not able to confront press, not able to do things that we would consider as active political campaigning, or are being worn down a lot easily vis-a-vis Joe Biden, and even to an extent Donald Trump. We had all those questions when he was in office about his health and how how fit he was to run the country. It's a fascinating aspect where I think it's probably one of those last barriers of millennial and Gen Z political action and we're only just seeing this tide turn. We saw it here in Australia with our last set of federal elections last year, to see the tide turn, to see more people that belong to us represent us in our parliaments and our governments as well.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a shame that we should have to fight so hard to be seen and to be heard. And I think a lot more progress would be made right now if a lot of the older generation, even though they are living longer and they're healthier longer, but if they would be willing to just step aside and allow the next generation to kind of move us forward. But yeah.
I find it very fascinating culturally, actually. The American ideal of going on to the nth degree, right to the end, and not knowing when to like call it in and call it quits and go, yeah, let's just hold, let's let someone else take this on, or let's not do that. It's a fascinating cultural difference, I find, where I will watch my American friends argued through to the nth degree a lot more often than I watch my Australian friends. Admittedly, I do work in journalism, so I think there's an aspect of apathy of arguing with people, because arguing for arguing's sake is a bit useless when it comes to, let's be honest, our incredibly biased journalistic system here in Australia that's owned mostly by Mr. Murdoch. But I don't know. It's a very fascinating cultural phenomenon, because we don't have age limits. We have age limits, I think, on our Supreme Court justices, the equivalent thereof. But I don't think we have age limits on, politicians. But I think maybe the nature of the campaigning that we as Australians expect mean that you have to be someone who can, walk around for 8 hours a day and not, need to be sitting in a wheelchair or can hide in an office, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Which I think is, I don't know, maybe it's the sparsity of our country that explains a little bit of that. There's a lot of walking that goes on. The journalists who follow the politicians around are very fit.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that culture changes here. I really don't, because the Supreme Court justices, that's a whole other thing. We got a whole group of folks who are pretty upset with Ruth Bader Ginsburg for holding on as long as she did, and then it just basically opened up another spot for another right-wing justice to take over. So it can be, have real consequence. It is having real consequences.
Yeah. I don't know, and it's fascinating you mentioned Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because it speaks to a wider point, I think, when we discuss progressive politics and the fact that it's not black or white, it's quite intersectional. Have you found it hard to make a nuanced point in a video format that's theoretically shareable and clippable?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started doing what I'm doing, TikTok's time limit was 1 minute. It was 60 seconds. And it was, in those early videos, you'll see I'm talking a million miles an hour and just trying to get it all in, make some sort of just some sort of salient point within that very, very limited amount of time. And so then, the topics that I would cover at that time were a little more simplistic. I would talk about Dr. Seuss. Okay, Dr. Seuss was racist. Dr. Seuss, this was what was in his book. And then sometimes I would break them up into 3 parts. That was one way that I would kind of deal with that time limitation. It was like, in part 2, I'm going to talk about this. And then I talked, the Aunt Jemima video talking about that branding. That was the one that really kind of blew me up on that platform. But the types of topics that I have started to cover from that time to now, or even to like October. It was probably, I'm trying to remember when it was, if it was October of 2020 or 2021, where they opened it up and started allowing us to make 3-minute videos. I think it was 2021. So it was about a year, a little over a year after I had been making videos. And all of a sudden it was like we could, be a little more nuanced and a little more thoughtful. And that's when I started the series, The Breakdown. And it was like, okay, now I get to really kind of tell some little short form stories. And I started doing videos on, Martha Wash, who was a kind of a disco type vocalist who was edged out for a thinner model, and they put her in the music video and did not give Martha Wash credit for singing background vocals on a lot of popular songs that we know, and told much more nuanced stories. And so it really helped me for them to open up that time limit. And then last year they opened it up to 10 minutes. So then I could really stretch out and just really start doing some deep dives on like the Dick Van Dyke Show and their focus on diversity and like I said, asking these kind of deeper questions about cultural appropriation versus appreciation. And, why is whiteface different than blackface? And why is white pride different than black pride? And, some of these things take a little while to flesh out. And I kind of look at some of those earlier videos where I had those 1-minute time limits, where I was trying to make some nuanced point about. One of them that really stands out and still stands out to me is a video that I did called "Can Black People Be Racist?" Because there is a lot of discussion around, racism and whether it has to have a systemic element or a power element in order to be truly called racism. But it's one of those that I still feel a little conflicted about because it caused probably one of the ones that caused one of the biggest controversies that I've done. Because I really was non-committal. I'm not someone who says, Black people can't be racist because of this. It's like, no, I didn't come out and say that. But I also said, if a Black person were to exhibit, prejudicial behavior, which of course we can present bigoted or prejudicial behavior. It's like, okay, well, we have to understand historically the historic context of, where this might be coming from. And why this might be, slightly categorized differently. But it didn't really get over, I think, with a lot of people because there just wasn't time. It just wasn't it wasn't the type of topic that could be handled in a minute. There was always going to be room for misinterpretation or for me to just come away as completely noncommittal and not having made a point at all. So I'm glad for the increased time limits so that I can, because I feel like it's more of my bag, the deeper kind of contextualizing and all of that. That's really my comfort zone.
Yeah. Did you ever consider, especially while you were working with those 1-minute time limits, of pushing longer form and more deep dive content to, other platforms, especially like YouTube? I see a lot of people who make social commentary end up making longer versions of social commentary on, YouTube, or they will live stream a discussion about something on Twitch or something like that. Have you ever considered that?
Yeah, for the first year, I was really focused on TikTok. I wasn't even putting my videos on Instagram, let alone Facebook or YouTube or anything like that. I really was totally, narrowly focused on TikTok because for me, it was like, okay, this is the platform where I don't have any family. I don't have any friends. They started to find me over there. But at first it was like, well, I kind of have this advantage of not having to worry about what people I know think about me doing this. And so that really freed me up to be able to just be my honest self. I wasn't worried about friends of my parents from their church coming along and judging what I had to say or, thinking that I had strayed from the path or whatever. So it freed me up for that first year to really focus my attention on TikTok. It was really helpful for me, and it helped me to develop a voice and to really put all of my energy into that one platform so that I knew exactly what worked over there. And, it helped me to develop a real audience. But after about a year, I don't even know if it took a year, but close to a year, I started to kind of branch out to other platforms. So trying to create specialized content, because I do that now. I create some videos that are super long form that end up on YouTube only, or Facebook and YouTube only. But it's just, you only have so much time in the day. So trying to create, one set of videos over here and another set of video, a completely different edit on other platforms. It can be very, very time consuming, especially with like the high production value type of content that I put out.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I always found it a little bit disingenuous when people were saying, well, you've got to create a different kind of content for this platform. It's like, it reminds me of people telling me that, and it's probably a valid thing, but I really hated it when people told me that my resume needed to be different for every job. And I was like, my resume is my resume.
Right.
It's a representative of my work. Like, I'm not going to... What am I going to change? That's a cover letter, like that. I can change that for the role,
right.
But like a resume stays the same.
A little bit,
I don't
yeah.
know, there was a point where I was
a little bit, yeah.
I was applying for a job a day, so
or I'll have a couple of versions. Back in the day when I was having to apply for a ton of jobs, I would have like a creative version of my resume, and then I would have one what was more for like, I don't know, just boring office job type stuff. So I get it. If I had a team working for me, maybe so, who was just like, all right, we're going to do this and this and this with your content. But it's like, if it's all on me, and I didn't have a podcast at that time. I really just started my podcast about a year and a half ago. I wish I had started it sooner. But it's just all of it's a lot of work. And I'm just now getting to the point where I'm like, okay, we've got to identify some folks that can help to carry this load, because it's just, I cannot be effective. I cannot be as effective as I want to be if I don't have help. So now I'm starting to explore maybe some options for people that I can work with, but I'm still a one-person show.
Yeah, that's obviously quite a bit of work. I know you're still fairly active musically. Did you kind of like put that to the side? Obviously, through the pandemic, you couldn't really perform, but have you gone back to creating more music?
Yeah, we actually put out an album. We recorded an album in December of 2020, which was a huge relief to be able to do. I mean, that was like record label from Nashville, where I lived for 13 years. They reached out and said, okay, we want to speak to all of the unrest that's happening, and we don't have any Black artists on our label. So would you come and make an album for us? And so we've been with them ever since. So I made like a kind of a protest album at that time. It was released in, I think, May of 2021. That was called Dreams of Waking. And then I just put out an album this year that was just self-titled. It's called Dara, Starr, Tucker. And so that's half of my original music, and then it's half just some odd covers. And so I'm really fortunate to be able to have been able to focus on music as well, like simultaneously, because that's always the concern. It's like, hey, is this one thing going to just gobble up all of my time and energy? And it's like, I am a singer. I am a writer. That's what I do. This sort of social media commentary was kind of a side thing that it allowed me to just kind of, find an audience and get it out of my system or whatever. But it was never supposed to be something that replaced the music. And so I'm glad just through the natural course of things that I have not had to make a choice. I have not had to, let go of one for the other. And you'll see now I've started to try to be a little more careful now that I have this album that's out this year at the end to just be like, some sort of plug, like, hey, I have a show coming up. I'm going to be doing a show in September in New York and October in DC. And I think maybe December in Atlanta, but I'll try to put like plugs now at the end of every video, every major video, and be like, hey, come and see me here. Link is in my bio. And I know it feels totally unrelated half the time, to what they just heard. They're like, what? You're singing? What? But if that's the only, because if I just go there and I say, come out to my show, they're going to show that to 2,000 people. And it's just, nobody's going to see it. So
it's a fascinating part where I think there is this assumption among the general public that, and as you were saying before, early on, you don't want to make that social commentary while you're a musician. You want to put on that like clean front, but at the same time, it's it probably has driven a lot more engagement, at least for you. As you said, finding that audience. Have you seen a bit more traction when it comes to your music, especially what you've put out recently?
Yeah, I think the music's done well. I mean, it also helps to now have like this small label that we're working with. The label's Green Hill Music.
Yeah.
So it helps, you know, that they've been able to kind of work with Virgin Music to kind of get some placements for a few of my songs on some playlists. As musicians know, you know, we live and die by the playlist on streaming services like Spotify and Apple Music and whatever. It really all is all about playlist placement. And so I've done better with playlist placement because of them, but definitely in terms of you know, filling up rooms, like we've sold out. I've done probably, I really have only done a handful of shows this year, but they've all been sold out or mostly sold out. And so, you know, when I have a lot of lead time, like I do with this New York show in September and the DC show in October, if I have a lot of lead time, then I have plenty of time to tell people, hey, come out. And there's people in the comments, you know, here and there being like, hey, I got my tickets. You know, we've probably heard from, you know, at least 20 people or so that have already confirmed that they've got their tickets for New York. So having the big social media audience doesn't matter for as much as you kind of think it will if you didn't blow up for music. So if my audience is not here because of my music, then there's only a certain number of them that will care enough to want to plug in and come out to a show. But you know, you get a video that does well enough, there will be enough of them that hear about it because of the plug you put on the end of it, that it makes a difference for, you know, the kind of smaller jazz club venues. You know, these rooms seat, you know, probably at most a couple of hundred people. So it can make a real difference in that respect. And, you know, just putting up music, period. I remember just even a couple of years ago, before I really started posting videos on Instagram, it would be, you know, amazing if I would put up a video and it would do a couple hundred views. Like if it got 300 views, I'd be like, oh, wow, you know, this video really took off. I mean, I wonder what the difference was with this one and the one we put up before that only got 78 views or whatever. And so now the music content that I put up may do a couple of thousand views in 24 hours. But which is really disappointing considering what the numbers usually look like for the breakdowns that I do. But I have to continue to remind myself, like a couple of years ago, you would have been happy for 200 views. Now you have 2,000. Like, just there is no downside to this. My mantra has become, there is no downside to audience building. There is absolutely no downside to building up an audience for, you know, however you do it, however that audience ends up being built. They're there. So just utilize it, you know?
Yeah. It's fascinating having worked on this podcast and helped other people with their other projects, but also in a journalism sense as well, working with smaller publications and bits and pieces, talking about that base audience and like what that base audience looks like and understanding it. And it's interesting because you often forget, too often I think we forget that there is a base audience there that will be, you know, consistently showing up when they can and supporting you, you know, you or your organization, regardless of the content you put out sometimes. And it's a weird phenomenon because I sit there sometimes and I look at, you know, especially content like yours where it goes from, you know, really interesting in-depth commentary that challenges people to talking about the entertainment industry and some very interesting aspects of the entertainment industry, to, you know, this is my music, this is who I am, this is, you know, this is my profession, and watching how there is still a through line of people who will go and, you know, at least like or view each one of those videos, regardless of, you know, which one of the variety it is. And then, you know, obviously there is a percentage conversion of people who watch your content who will go and buy tickets, as you've already said. And I think we often forget that there is always a base audience. There's always a people who are fans. It feels weird to say the word fan. I don't think it, like, and when it comes to social media, it's a weird word to use.
I think so. Yeah. There are people, you know, who just want to know more about you and what you do. And if they lock into your commentary and that kind of thing, it's just like, well, who is this? Who is this person? I want to understand you better, you know? And I always hope that with the music that they feel somewhat of a through line. If they hear my music, that it kind of feels like my commentary in a weird way. I hope that the same kind of spirit comes through, regardless of how they are
Yeah.
experiencing me. I hope on some level that's true.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's very fascinating. Has the experience of writing long form social commentary changed some of the way that you write messages into your music?
Um, well, I really haven't written much, I have to say. I have not written much in the last few years. I've probably written, just a handful of songs. I've got my keyboard. You can probably see it's set up over here behind me, and it just has been in the last month or so. And I've put out a couple videos. I think just one video where I was playing piano and actually singing a song from my childhood, like a church song from my childhood. But other than that, I'm just now kind of creeping back and trying to form, reestablish my bond with music because I've moved recently from New York to Philadelphia, and the keyboard's been shut down for the last year. We just put it up, and we've been here almost a year. And so I just have experienced that's another layer of the frustration that I experience with being a singer and being a performer, which is that I was just so active with songwriting for so long that I felt like, well, what am I writing all this music for? Like, who am I writing all of this music for? I will never put out enough albums. I will never have enough opportunities to put out albums where I could include all of this music. I'm just constantly like, waiting for opportunities to share music that I've written that is not, there, that has no outlet except for me to perform it at live shows occasionally. And it just feels like it sort of dissipates after that. So I backed away and I just stopped writing as much. I stopped writing for logistical reasons, like I said, not even just having my keyboard set up, but then also because, first of all, doing the online commentary and stuff keeps me very busy and it takes up every second of mental space and of time. So just a matter of, not being able to do everything. But then also like just the frustration of like, why am I writing all this music? I just, so I'm interested to see, said all that to say, I'm interested to see the type of musical content that comes forth from having spent the last couple of years in this more kind of commentary space and activism space. What does that produce? Do I continue to write the very kind of inward facing contemplative music that I have been writing most of my life, or do these messages come out in song? I don't know yet. So it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, very fascinating. I worked at a community radio station that's got a history of activism and music and bits and pieces, and it was always very fascinating to talk about that and talk about how people's activism impacted their music and the variety of ways that they got to see their activism communicated through song. I worked in the news department in this radio station, like I was just a journalist, but the conversations that you got to witness or hear, or the music that, it was all non-mainstream kind of, very Rage Against the Machine kind of esque. It was all very fascinating to listen to because you just didn't know what you were going to hear next. And I think that's kind of the beauty of putting music out there, is that it's a representation of your identity at the time. I've played classical piano since the age of 4, and I've played trombone since the age of 12. And even in a classical sense, not even writing music on my own, you listen back to a recording of your performance and you can hear how you were feeling, or what you were thinking about at that time, and it brings back really strong memories. And I think it's a phenomenon that we don't talk about very often in music, to be honest, and I think it's very important. I learned through the Suzuki method. So this is like, very core in terms of that very Japanese sensibilities of like your whole being is placed, through your instrument. And I don't think we acknowledge it very often. And even more so in music writing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do listen to those albums, and I particularly if I was writing around an experience. I lost both of my parents in 20. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but it's 2014. I lost them both, and so the album that I put out right after that it's called Oklahoma Rain, and it is very much reflective of exactly what I was experiencing at that time, and it's very griefy, and it's very it just feels like what it was. And on some level, I really appreciate it, but I have to remember if I go back to that place, it's like, man, you're going to feel the raw and the real emotions that I was pouring into my music. And that, so much so that I had to stop myself from writing. That was really when I stopped writing so much, is because all I could write were these kind of deathy, griefy songs. And so, to kind of revisit that stuff, it takes you right back to that time.
Yeah. It's super interesting. And I think when it then comes to, changes in your lifestyle or changes in, where your creative outlets have been focused as well, as you said, over the last few years, you've been really focusing on, the social commentary rather than the music writing. I think it's always an interesting hold your breath moment of, is this going to, am I going to, what is my work going to look like moving forward?
Yeah.
Which is very exciting, to be honest, and I'm very excited to hear some of your music as things get back on the road a little bit. I think COVID's still a thing, but I think we finally can say that it's well and truly behind us.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm interested to see what it is I produce. And I'm not even, it maybe the music itself will provide an outlet for me not to have to, address all of the troubles and the ills of the world. But, that's just it's never really been something that I have put in my music in the past. And it has been more of an opportunity for me to kind of work through those internal issues. It just has felt more like the diary in music form for me. And that may still be the space that I'm comfortable expressing my music in. And if that's the case, then I'm totally fine with that. I have an outlet where I can talk about, all of these other things that I feel like I should be making commentary about. Like I don't have to put it in my music. And so, but I do feel that the last few years have taught me how to, as the line in one of my favorite films, The Joy Luck Club, says, the last few years have taught me how to shout. They have taught me how to use my voice unapologetically. And so I think that spirit will absolutely make its way into my music.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dara, for coming on Content and Capable. It's been lovely to chat to you. I've really enjoyed learning so much from you this just last hour.
Thank you for having me on, Sam. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed talking to you.
No, yeah, thank you. Where can people find you on the internet?
Dara Starr Tucker. That's Dara with one R and Starr with two. So I'm that on most platforms. On Instagram, I'm still Dara Tucker B, and that's a vestige of signing up for Instagram. I don't know how many years ago, 10 years ago or something. But we're trying to get that changed, and slowly but surely. But it's Dara Tucker B on Instagram, but I think I'm Dara Starr Tucker everywhere else. Facebook, TikTok, Threads. I'm now on. And, YouTube everywhere. Dara Starr Tucker.
Yeah. Awesome. Has there been anything that you've been listening or reading that you wanted to plug?
That I have been listening to. I haven't had the opportunity to listen to very much music at all. I will, in the spirit of the announcement for the Leonard Bernstein movie that was just announced, I would recommend a book called Famous Father Girl by Jamie Bernstein. that's Leonard Bernstein's daughter. Yeah, and I just, so if you're a fan of his music, if he's someone that you pay attention to, and someone that you care about at all, but yeah, it's called Famous Father Girl by Jamie Bernstein, and it's just her memoir of growing up with, as the child, as the daughter of the maestro. And he's just one of my favorite creative people, and it was really cool to kind of get a behind the scenes view of, and I listened to the audiobook, but just getting a behind the scenes view of what it was like to be in just some satellite figure in his life, because I think he was just such a bright star that burned, and maybe reminded me a little bit of my own father. So yeah, that's the one I would recommend.
That's lovely. I definitely have to check out the book. It's a fascinating the Bernsteins. Yeah, very
absolutely. I'm so looking forward to that movie, even despite the controversy. I'm looking forward to that movie.
Yeah. You can find me at sam.the.journalist on Instagram and on TikTok. Obviously follow the podcast Content the Letter N Capable on Instagram as well. This week I'm going to plug a song that I discovered and listened to. It's a bit, I was actually really happy on like how jazzy it was. It was one of those songs that like, I think it's been in a couple of pop playlists on Spotify, and that's how it ended up, heading towards me. But I found it very fascinating just to listen to the backing just in general. But it's a song called Sax by Fleur East. I really hope I'm pronouncing that name right. I think that they're a UK-based artist. And it was just like a really, sax as in like saxophone, SAX. And it was just like... just a fun poppy tune that was still, it's still, I don't know, it was getting me through work the other week as I was looking forward to a holiday. So I really was enjoying it.
Okay, I will check it out.
But yeah, thank you so thank you so much, Dara, for coming on the podcast. I've really, as I said before, it's such an educational experience.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Sam. I thank you for reaching out, and I'm honored to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
Content and Capable was recorded, edited, and produced by Samuel O'Brien. You can follow the podcast at Content the Letter N Capable on Instagram, and you can find it on Facebook. You can also send an email through to contentandcapablepod@gmail.com with any of your thoughts, queries, or concerns. The best way to support the podcast is to leave a review on your preferred podcatcher so more people can hear the podcast. The art was done by Opia, and the music was written, edited, and produced by Jason Hilton. Content and Capable is proud to be a part of the Deus Ex Media Network, where you can find a podcast for any of your nerdy interests.
Do you love to be super scared? Do you enjoy listening to hilarious hot takes on timeless classics? Well, fear not, listeners. I'm here. Welcome to the Super Scary Podcast, where we cover everything from the supernatural to the superpowered. I'm your host, Josh, a scaredy cat nerd who enjoys superhero, sci-fi, and horror movies way too much. Whether I'm processing my trauma from Texas Chainsaw Massacre or reminiscing on the nostalgia of Hocus Pocus, my guests and I have a hilarious time going through our favorite and sometimes not so favorite moments. I'm your friend till the end, listeners, because everyone's entitled to one super scary podcast. We post weekly episodes on Mondays, and you can find us at Super Scary Podcast on all the socials. See you in the afterlife, listeners.
Thank you for listening to Content and Capable. Don't forget to rate and review, and we'll see you next week for another episode.
Deus Ex Media.